Okay, so we're back with Native American religion, and because they believed that spirits animate the world around them, they're always trying to tap into this essential life force. So with many Native American societies from North, Central to South America, a lot of emphasis placed upon ritual dance, the ingestion of certain substances such as peyote or mescal to try and gain spiritual visions, going on vision quests, fasting, all in an effort to try and kind of access or tap into these spiritual forces around them. The corn dance of many southeastern tribes as the corn crops coming in, a dance to try and really sort of honor the spirit of the great spirit that gives life to them in the form of this most important crop of corn. You'll see that a lot of decoration, petroglyphs, paintings also made, again, trying to link humans and animals and the natural world, kind of blending it all together as part of this essential spiritual life force. Another very visible way in which some native peoples, especially here in North America, decided to try and honor these spiritual forces was by constructing earthen mounds. For any of you who are from Georgia, there are several so-called mound building sites here. Literally in our backyard, there's the Etowah site up near Cartersville. A little further south, you've got the Okmulgee site near Macon, Georgia, that you can go visit today. And what would happen is they would create these earthen structures. Think about them almost like earthen pyramids instead of stone pyramids. They're flat-topped so that you would go to the top of one of these earthen structures to hold ceremonies, religious of deep religious significance, or the chief's home, or the main priest's home maybe at the top of one of these structures. And also for those that were venerated in these societies, very highly regarded. Their priests, their medicine men, their chiefs, they might also be interred after their death. They might be buried along with sacred objects. This is all really in a bid to access these spiritual forces by getting closer to the heavens, right? By physically going on top of these mounds. The largest of the so-called mound building sites in all of North America is a site that is referred to as Cahokia near present-day St. Louis. You can go visit it today. Over 100 of these massive earthen mounds were created at this particular site. You can see this is a modern-day aerial photograph of the largest of these mounds at Cahokia, known as Monk's Mound, and that is not a toy car. That is a real highway, just to give you a sense of scale of how very large Monk's Mound is. Monk's Mound measures 16 acres at its base and was 100 feet tall. Probably took perhaps as much as a decade just to build this one mound, and there are multiple of the structures like this. Not quite as big, but multiple structures like this scattered around the Cahokia site. And we believe that at its height, sort of at its heyday, between about 600 and 1400 AD, that Cahokia had an unusually large population, perhaps as many as 10 to 20,000 residents, lying alongside the Mississippi River in the very fertile ground that is flooded by the Mississippi River. They could support these huge numbers. So Cahokia seemed to have been a hub of trade and commerce. They were trading with tribes as far north as the Great Lakes. They were trading with tribes as far south as the Gulf Coast. So a very interesting area. They also appeared to have been looking towards the heavens and tracking the movement of the stars. They had a site kind of like Stonehenge in England, but made out of wood, and so archaeologists dubbed it Woodhenge. That was excavated here at this particular site. These wooden structures placed at specific areas around a central plaza area, and that they would align with the summer and winter solstices, or the autumnal and vernal equinoxes. So they're clearly watching the heavens as well over time. Again, all of this tied to their religion. Moving a little further west, we can see sort of the parent culture that will give birth to a number of other later tribal societies like the Hopi, the Zuni, and the Pueblo, the Anasazi culture. and they're having to tweak things significantly. They're living in a far less well-watered region, an arid desert climate that doesn't get nearly as much rain, so they will become excellent at crafting watertight containers and decorating them very beautifully to store whatever water would fall from the skies. They took advantage of building materials near them. They don't have very many trees, so you can see from the picture here of the Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde Park in Colorado, they would use natural rock outcroppings as their roof, and then they would use the ground beneath their feet. They would create adobe structures, mixing the soil with water and then packing it tight, letting it bake in the sun. Very ingenious peoples. They even kind of tweaked or genetically modified, as we'd say today, their corn crops so that they could grow to maturity with far less water, so that they could continue to feed themselves in this harsher climate. Now, moving farther south, moving into what we think is present-day Central America, probably the most advanced of all native societies throughout the Americas was that of the Mayan civilization, which really reached its peak between about 300 and 900 AD. And we say the most advanced for several different reasons. First and foremost, the Mayan civilization was not unified. Instead, it was a bunch of little city-states, like Chichen Itza or Palenque or Tikal. They weren't unified, but they all shared the same culture, the same language. They traded with one another quite often. They mined things from the volcanic highlands, semi-precious stones like hematite, cinnabar, and jade, and they would use these as trade items. They farmed the lowlands very successfully, which is hard to do because the lowlands areas are rainforest. So they had to dig canals and ways in which they could drain off the excess water before it washed away their crops. So very sophisticated when it came to sort of material culture and trade. Also sophisticated when it came to their writing system. Very uncharacteristic. The Mayans developed a written component to their spoken language. It's not a one-for-one. It was really more like a hieroglyphic system, picture symbols, which they would etch into stone discs or the side of their stone structures. But nonetheless, they kept a form of writing system. They also developed a very accurate calendar system based upon their observation of astronomy. They're watching the movement of the sun and the moon throughout a calendar year, and they're developing a calendar to go along with the changing of the seasons. And all of this is being done, again, for their religious beliefs. For the Mayans, they believed that specific rituals had to be held on specific days, the exact same day, every single year, from time forward, or else cosmic chaos would ensue. Alright, so they take this with the utmost seriousness. So as a result, their calendar was wildly accurate. I mean, to the point where it was off by only like one day every 2,000 years. Far more accurate, for example, than the calendar that we use today. Us modern folks have to add an extra day, don't we, to the month of February, leap day, every 4 years to make up for that. The Mayan calendar didn't have to accommodate that. All right, so very, very sophisticated. Unfortunately, we don't know what happened to the Mayans. They were gone before Europeans arrived. Evidence shows there could have been a series of ecological disasters, maybe famine, earthquakes. We just don't know what in particular happened to them, but very, very sophisticated civilization. Now, moving a little bit to the west of the Yucatan Peninsula, which is where the home of the Mayans was, we look a little bit later in time and we see the rise of another very formidable empire, the Aztecs. Theirs was an empire that developed around present-day Mexico City. And unlike the Mayans, the Aztecs was a unified empire, and theirs was one built upon military conquest. Nothing happened that the Aztecs weren't trying to prepare for. Theirs was one in which they trained their male youths from the age of 15 onwards. They all were required to learn the history of their peoples. They were sent to military training school to learn hand-to-hand combat, strategy, what have you. All of this because the Aztecs conquered and subdued anyone they came into contact with. All right, so theirs was an empire based on conquest and maintaining a tight, firm grip on all these subject peoples who hated them and were always looking for a way to rise up against them. So with the Aztecs, they, in a somewhat similar fashion, also developed a written form of their language, which was Nahuatl, and theirs was a picture-based system. They, too, were very much interested in tracking the passage of time, so they developed a very accurate solar calendar, and a lot of this also feeds back into, just like with the Mayans, their religious worship. There had to be certain festivals, certain rituals held with precision every single year. And when we talk about the Aztecs, they, like the Mayans, created these stepped stone pyramid structures, many of which are still with us today. So, like the Mayans, the Aztecs were excellent engineers and stonemasons. And the purpose of their stone pyramids was, in many cases, was for religious rituals that did include human sacrifice. The Mayans practiced human sacrifice. The Aztecs, just like prior civilizations in this region, like the Olmec and the Toltec, theirs was a culture based around the shedding of human blood, not just animal blood and sacrifices. And in fact, for the Aztecs as well as the Mayans, they believed that you as a living human, not just as a sacrificial victim, but as a living human, you personally were responsible for shedding your own blood, not killing yourself, but shedding a certain amount of your own blood every single year as a sign of your faith and your willingness to suffer to honor the deities. Now, unlike with the Mayans, we know exactly what happened to the Aztecs. We have some foreigners, some pale-faced, stinky, hairy Spanish peoples arriving on the coast of what we think of as present-day Mexico today. They will arrive in 1519 under the leadership of Hernan Cortez. And when these two groups meet, it's not going to end well for the native peoples. The Spanish will have the benefit of horses. The horses were not native to the Americas. They will have horses as a military technology to fight them on horseback. They will have metal armor to help, kind of withstand the slings and arrows of the native peoples. The Europeans will also have firearms or guns that will give them quite an advantage over the native peoples. But above all, the greatest single advantage that the Spanish will have over the natives will be a weapon they didn't even know they were carrying: disease. And we'll talk more about that as we move on.